Good morning, everyone, and welcome to new presentation. And the topic is very interesting. I'm going to talk about Econlinguistics and usability. So these two things were not combined until now. So it's a brand new kind of research that you won't find many work going on in this area, in this interdisciplinary area of usability, technical communication, and econ linguistics. So this is very new. So just a bit of a background about who I am. I am Professor Debopriyo Roy at the Center for Language Research, and I'm going to talk about, as I said, a very new kind of research. Until now, I have been working on the technical communication for industrial applications and especially mechanical applications, so physical processes in the industry, especially in the manufacturing industry. And so I was working on the areas like the diagramming areas, of course, the UML, the Unified Modeling Language, concept mapping, content management systems, content delivery portals, and so on. But since then, uh, I'm using those concepts to better understand econ linguistics in terms of how metadata is created successfully for people to understand financial concepts and economic concepts. And I'm doing this because my background is in economics and econometrics. So it's a direct correlation between what I've studied and what I'm going to talk about this morning. All right, so let me share my presentation and then I will get started. Okay, so the topic is econ linguistics and UML diagramming in finance, use of LLM for web usability analysis. So as you can see from the name, of course, it's technical information processing, but it has a very strong usability angle to it, a very strong web usability study that's incorporated as part of understanding econ linguistics successfully and using UML diagramming to better understand the application and to make the web usability part a better application. So let's get started here. Uh, so econ linguistics. So what is econ linguistics? Econ linguistics is actually an attempt in research to make better use of terms that are used in finance and economics for customers to better understand the structure of information and how it's used in sentences and how it's used in policy analysis and investment portfolios, insurance policies, and so on. So there are many kinds of applications. So and the relation with technical communication is that it's successfully used for technical communication applications because both in econ linguistics and technical communication, the attempt is to better present technical information for non-technical people, for them to better understand and take bold decisions which they will understand in better light. And there are many applications which are not very easy to understand. So, for example, things like credit card statements. We often do not understand many things in the credit card statements, many policies, conditions which are applied, which we don't understand well. Investment portfolios have the same policy. You can be a risk averse individual, you can be a risk prone individual. There are many policies, many decisions, many clicks. So when you are using a simulator, online simulator, or when you're trying to make online trading, there are many steps that you have to take. If you don't understand it well, the consequences can be severe and you may lose a lot of money if you do that. Loan agreements can have the same things, the insurance policies, the financial reports, the tax returns, marketing materials. We see that all the time. So there's a great risk when something like this happens, when you don't understand the application of the language well and what it means and how it could be used. So some of the problem types are terminology and jargons. cultural differences that makes these things happen, translation issues. If it's not translated well from one language to another, then it can completely change the meaning or the severity of what's being said and how it's to be used. Assumptions about knowledge, complex data presentation, emotional language. Like in marketing, you use a lot of emotional language, misalignment of goals that happens all the time. You use one kind of term for another kind of application where it shouldn't have been used, and it completely changes the meaning of what's being said. Overgeneralization and things like that. So we'll see plenty of examples like this when we move from here. So basically, the question is, how is it interesting for computer science majors? Econ linguistics apparently looks like a field of economics. So why should computer science majors study something in economics? Well, firstly, the thing is that like a technical writer who is also an allied field of which is also an allied field of computer science um, can work in any industry. A technical writer can work in a law firm. The technical writer can work in a healthcare industry. And similarly, the technical writers, they're increasingly, we are seeing that computer science majors with knowledge of technical writing are moving into investment banking, finance, and economic firms, policymaking firms, and so on. So computer science is just not restricted to uh, computer science in that sense. They also need to have subject knowledge of the various fields that where they're trying to move into. So Econolinguistics is a very interesting application, as I said, which talks about applications in the finance industry, economics industry, and so on. So enhanced user experience. So if somebody wants to, if a computer science major is interested in both finance and UX design and NLP, then this could be a very interesting field of study. Fintech is picking up very fast now, and computer science majors will have a lot to contribute in the fields of banking, investments, and financial planning. AI and language analysis. So if somebody wants to do more into the programming for sentiment analysis, algorithmic trading, and financial forecasting, then computer science majors are needed. Programming skills are needed for financial professionals, or computer science majors can develop their understanding of financial policy making and user interface design as from the usability perspective. UML diagramming becomes a very important part of that understanding. So basically, the point is that when you have a problem with the language in interface design, UML diagramming can be a great solution because it helps to dissect the information and break down complex systems into manageable parts and provide a clear visual map of how something needs to be understood. And in interdisciplinary teams, an economist can work with a UX specialist, a computer science major who is not only a specialist in interaction design, but someone who is very well versed with information architecture, as like a financial simulator who is also working on algorithmic tradings and so on. So it's a very interdisciplinary field, and that's where econ linguistics becomes such a crucial thing for UX experts to understand where the problem is happening in terms of decision making, in terms of the customer understanding the products that's being sold, the kind of high stakes that are involved. If somebody takes a loan and has no clue of no understanding or completely misreads a loan agreement, what's going to happen? If somebody is working on an investment portfolio, a risk averse individual may be investing in a high risk product without understanding the consequences just because of the language. It happens all the time, and not enough work is being done in this area of econ linguistics. All this term that was coined in 1990s, and ever since it's in place, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, even more in this area. So these are the things that we will talk about as part of this presentation. So let's move on and see deeper into what could be done using UML diagram in our classroom. So I'm going to talk about the pedagogical context. I'm going to talk about how UML diagram could be successfully used in combination with the LLM prompt engineering um, to better understand, to better dissect a particular situation and create the interface in a way so that the customer can successfully navigate through a platform like Yahoo Finance or Investopedia and so on. Okay. So, concrete examples of why econ linguistics is important in business communication, some things like advertising and consumer response. So, for example, words like free, limited time offer, or premium tap into economic decision making and create perceived values, but we are not sure what kind of values are being created. So, the interface can help better manage those words so that the users understand what it means in that particular context for that given portfolio, for that particular loan agreement, and so on. Financial market reporting, describing a market dip as a correction rather than a crash. So when you're using the terms like crash, rather than something like a correction, probably you didn't mean to use it, but if you use it, it will severely impact consumer confidence, and a bull market can turn into a bear market, and a bear market can turn into a bull market in no time for a given portfolio. So these types of things are very common. It happens all the times. When we have elections, the market crashes just because what the press, the kind of language that the press comes up with and advertises that leads to change in market sentiment. So these types of things are very common. Language in contracts and pricing. So we see loan agreements, we see the credit card statements, we see any other kinds of agreement that happens in the market between two buyers, like the export agreement, import agreement, export licensing, import licensing kind of things. Simple or vague language in terms of market value or reasonable efforts can lead to economic decisions and legal interpretations. And we need clarity on that, and we don't have enough clarity. So that's where econ linguistics comes in. Bilingual markets and product labeling. So, for example, in Canada, in bilingual market like Canada, brands often use French to show more sophistication and hype up the value. And so the consumer confidence, the consumer sentiment is built around language. The consumer preference is built around how you feel about the language and what a use of a French word for a particular product may mean. So sophistication versus English is considered as more for a daily use. We see that all the time. We have seen that also in countries like India very often, that many products in many states are in English. Of course, English is the official language, but the way they write it, the way the packages, they create a hype in the perceived value. So that's where another area where econ linguistics plays a big role in making people understand the value of the product in the market. Banking language and trust. So, for example, words like secure, trusted, or protected, and these types of things create a lot of customer confidence, irrespective of the kind of service that's provided by the banks and so on. Translation and globalization in trade agreements. The translation could be a big thing because a trade agreement can just go haywire if both the parties are not on the same page in terms of understanding what a language means. Different translations of key economic terms can alter perceptions of what each party is agreeing to. And there can be many examples of that, and misunderstanding or disputes that may arise from misinterpreting the language. So in e-commerce, we have often seen things like buy now or only two left in the cart and those kinds of things. These are marketing strategies. This may not be entirely true because your inventory may be much larger than what seems to be on the surface, and you're not advertising it as that. So add to cart versus buy now to show immediacy, to show that something needs to be done immediately on something. And that can impact sales and so on. Uh, so, and then using terms like in apps, in financial apps, you often use terms like growth, then high potential returns, best for ambitious investors, and so on. These are all advertising terms which are not exactly what it means. So if you click here, click on those terms. If you click on modest growth portfolios, it may not take you exactly, and it will give you several options which you can then misinterpret, and it will take you to another option. So these kinds of things can happen all the time. So these are all kind of, there are many other examples also, but these are examples of where things can go south in if the econ linguistics things fail, if it's misinterpreted. All right. So in terms of the process, okay, so when you're in a classroom, how do you teach something like this? And how do you use UML diagramming to better understand things like this? So you can teach students with a video tutorial, okay? You can teach them a video tutorial, and they watch a video that guides them in a platform such as Investopedia, okay? And then you take them to a reading and content identification. You give them a reading, you give them a quiz, and ensure that they really understood the video tutorial, the steps that were taken broadly. Then you let them go through the simulation and a complete website analysis with the user interaction patterns, understanding how users are interacting, how the students are interacting with the system, whether they are taking help from the video tutorial or the reading comprehension, where they mastered or kind of try to comprehend what the content is all about. And then you start working on concept maps, okay? And you may be provided prompts on how to create UML diagramming based on their understanding. And UML diagramming can talk about very specific cases like the actors, the attributes that's in work, and so on, and the actions. So, the actors, the attributes, and the actions. You can start from there because there are many, many, many kinds of UML diagrams, and it's completely endless, and you can show it for different kinds of reasons, and we'll see some of the primary ones. So it's not possible to show all of these, but we'll talk about a few standard ones that are used in the industry all the time. So concept map draft one. So you get a layer. You're provided with prompts. Okay, the students are provided with prompts, and you can get that from LLMs. Okay, you can give them a layer one prompt, then you can give them a layer two prompt on the basis of which they improve their concept map from draft one to draft two. And similarly, you can give them layer three prompts, and we'll see the examples for each of these. Now, once the concept map is done based on something like Lucidchart and Creately, or you can also use software like IHMC concept mapping software, you move on to the UML diagram draft one. So students create their own plant UML. So you move from concept maps because the concept maps helps you really clarify the concept based on the video tutorial, based on the reading comprehension, website analysis. You can also make a team in the class where students interact with each other, trying to explore exactly if they're on the same page in terms of the understanding of both the interface and the concept of financial investing in the first place. And so from the concept map, you move on to something like the UML diagram, draft one, and students create their own plant UML or Python code from LLM. They can use LLM because we are talking about an English class, right? So the idea is not to make them write codes. The idea is to ensure that they are able to express their understanding of the concept, their critical thinking ability. So for each of the concept maps, you can ask students to write up a passage or answer quizzes which actually reflects the concept map that they have drawn. All right. So anyway, so move on from the concept maps, draft one, draft two, draft three, for which you have provided them prompts, specific prompts. Then you move on to the UML diagramming, like the class diagram, the component diagrams, the state diagrams, the sequence diagrams, the use case diagrams. So and then you are using, and you're showing them not only the prompts for that. Alternatively, you can also show them the made concept maps using something like Marmot chart, then plant UML, Git UML coding, and so on. And then you move on to the UML diagramming part two, draft two, where you actually create state diagrams. State diagrams shows the different states that a user of the system is in. Okay, so if you are a high risk individual, high risk investor, you will be in certain states during the process and you will take steps accordingly. So this is also a procedural diagram, but not in the, so until now I've been using it for the industrial context, and this is a financial context, but this is still a usability context. So then based on that, you create the UML diagram draft two, and then what happens is that you can do a usability study where you have a statistical analysis of how exactly the users are interacting with the system, and your state diagrams can be drawn based on the understanding of the statistics of where the students clicked, how long they have spent time, what kind of errors they committed on the investment page or various links where they created on Investopedia, Morningstar, or Yahoo Finance, and so on. So you create a UML diagram, yes, a UML state diagram based on the statistics that you see in terms of where they have clicked. And we'll see examples of that. So then you ask students to write a text explanation generation based on the UML diagram. Okay, and then what students can do, they can compare the self-generated draft with the image interpretation text draft generated by ChatGPT for the image analyzer. So the state diagram, you put the state diagram into LLM, you get a review of what the diagram means, and you match it with your text and see whether it matches, or in terms of the content, in terms of the content comprehension, in terms of the sequence in which the events have been mentioned. All right. So that's how it's going to work. That's how a complete class can be taught in finance and computer science, focus with a focus on visualization, which is the UML diagramming, and also a focus on usability. All right, so let's move on. All right, so here you see UML diagrams, different kinds of. So UML diagram is the Unified Modeling Language diagram. It's a visual representation, and you see various kinds of prompts that are related to different kinds of UML diagrams. So the class diagram. So a class diagram for an online banking system would show the main entities, their attributes, and relationships. So the classes could be the customer ID, name, address, email, account with attributes like account number, balance, transactions. These are all classes. Then you go on to the relationships. A customer can own multiple accounts, an account can have multiple transactions, and so on. So students can actually copy this, because these are just examples shown, and students can copy this and use it for another thing. So for example, this is a online banking system. You can use it for an online ATM. All right. And similar investment portfolios where similar kinds of classes and relationships could be drawn out. And students can just replicate the information from one example to the next. Then you go on to the use case diagrams, and you see the actors, the use cases, the association smart. So the use cases, you see the deposit funds, withdraw funds, transfer money. So these are the actions that a typical customer will take, whether or a bank Taylor will take in case of if you have to draw up a use case diagram for their activities. Um, and then the sequence diagram talks about the sequence in which the actions took place. So you have the actors, you have identified the actors, the customer, the online banking system, account, database, and then you have the messages. So and you see how the sequence has been shown in the sequence diagram. And the activity diagrams so it shows how a user goes through the steps to request a loan. So if you're asking for a loan from a bank, what's the online procedure? Okay, you start a loan request, input personal information, and so on. Okay, so the sequence diagram shows the steps involved in doing a particular activity like transferring funds between accounts, and an activity diagram can shows also shows the steps that the user goes through to request a loan. So activity diagram and the sequence diagram is kind of similar, but activity diagram has more flexibility because you can do the same thing in three ways. To get the same job done. Sequence diagram may not be able to do that because sequence diagram shows a particular standard way a particular thing is done. So that's the sequence, a given sequence. An activity diagram will have more flexibility in terms of the real-time activity that's happening with the customer or the bank teller and so on. All right, and here on the right-hand side, you see the UML diagram types. Basically, when we play with the UML diagram, you have two types. You have the structural diagrams and you have the behavioral diagrams, different kinds of diagrams. So the structural diagrams are more static. So it's more static. It's exactly what happens, the structure, the system in place that's the structural diagrams. The behavioral diagrams are more dynamic. Behavioral diagrams talks about the activity, okay, what's going on actually, the kind of sequence in which a particular things happen, a particular use case. So it's not cast in stone, all right? You can change the process as you move on. You can access the same thing in multiple ways. You can get the job done through different portfolios, different ways, and there's no one way of doing things. So it's more about the communication, it's more about the sequence, it's more about the interaction, it's more about the activity, it's more about the use cases, and so on. So that's the behavioral, the dynamic side of things. Okay. So basically, this talks about the different kinds of websites that this project is using and will be using. So they will be using Yahoo Finance, the Morningstar, Investopedia, and so on to gather real-time data on investment and saving options, risk and potential returns, those kinds of portfolios. And as I said, the students can use Lucidchart and Creately to create the basic concept maps and then match it with the UML diagrams using something like the plant UML coding or the Git UML coding. So those kinds of things, and you can match, and you can also start from the visualization going back to the text, or you can start from text and then go towards the visualization. Your assignments in a class, in a language course can go either way. All right. So, and here you see a picture of the Investopedia simulator, and the interaction design of the Investopedia simulator can help readers understand how a state diagram should be drawn, in which way a particular investor or a particular customer is interacting with the system. Okay. So this is the schema for clarification of miscommunication in Econlinguistics with UML diagrams. So you first have an introduction, then you identify the miscommunication, the potential miscommunication that can take place. So for example, terms like APR may confuse customers. You might interpret as the interest applied per transaction instead of the annual rate. So you may be able to you may underestimate the value of the cost of the borrowing. Phrases like minimum payment due and remaining balance may lead to uncertainty. You don't know how much is left. You don't know the cycle. You don't know how the interest is charged. How the late fees is applied. So those kinds of things can be clarified using schemas like the UML diagramming. Any kinds of UML diagramming that helps clarify these kinds of confusion that's happening. Then we have terms such as revolving balance or grace period. We don't know what revolving balance means, how long it's going to continue, at what rate, what kind of interest is going to be charged in the interim period. If there is a late fee, what other fees will be applied? What does grace period mean? Okay, is it grace period goes indefinitely, or there's a certain period for which it's applicable? So uh, is it indefinite flexibility? We don't know. So all these kinds of econ linguistics miscommunication could be clarified using things like various kinds of UML diagramming, and that's what the purpose of this project is. So terms like account value, cash value, and purchasing power in brokerage accounts can appear similar but represent distinct financial matrices. So things like that. So anyway, so you do the initial, so you identify the miscommunication, you do the initial diagramming from concept map, you move on to plant UML diagramming, and then you do a refinement of things and testing. Um, it's an iterative process. You keep doing that using more usability data that helps you understand how the user is primarily interacting with the system, and the sequence of activities that's happening, the dynamic side of things. So we talked about the structural UML diagrams and the more behavioral UML diagrams. So in this case, when you are refining and testing, you have to use the usability data to better understand the behavioral UML diagramming side of things, like the activity diagram, the communication diagram, the other kinds of diagrams that I've been talking about here. Okay. So this is very important to understand, because if you understand the use case diagrams, if you understand all these kinds of activity diagrams, then the sequence diagrams, if you better understand this, you understand the dynamic side of how the econ linguistics mistakes are happening and how you can get back from those mistakes. So the usability studies and the statistics help you better understand that. So anyways, so that's exactly what the story is out here. And then here you see the many investment options, the high risk options. So you provide a prompt like this. This could be construed as the first layer of information that you provide the students, and you ask them to identify user roles, whether you're a risk tolerant investor or a conservative investor. So if you mark yourself as high risk, this is what you're doing. So you're doing a use case diagram and you're doing a class diagram. So class diagram is more on the static side of things. You identify the risk tolerant investor, the conservative investor, what they do and what they focus on. So the risk tolerant investor is going to focus on the growth portfolio, and the conservative investor is going to focus on the stable portfolio, which is not really focused on growth, but maintaining the stability of the money that has been invested. And when you move on to the class diagrams, you have an investment portfolio and you divide it into three types. You have the high risk portfolio, the medium risk portfolio, and the low risk portfolio. And and then based on your portfolio, the kind of actions you take. So the risk is very high. So expected return could also be very high, but there's also a chance that you may lose a lot of money. So these options, so all these options are provided for in the class diagram. Okay. And then this also shows the savings options, the low risk individual. You show the activity diagram and the sequence diagram. I could have shown the same one as the use case diagram and the class diagram, but here I'm more into the behavioral side of things, and I'm trying to show the low risk options, savings options. So you see an activity diagram on top here. So the investment options, I'm not going very deep into this because it's going to take a lot of time, but you can see how you can showcase what I'm showing in the text. So either you show the uh, prompt one, kind of the first draft of the prompt, that based on which the students can make a concept map like this or a UML diagram like this, or you go the other way. All right. Either way, you can work through that through critical thinking and make the user understand what's going on. So, and this is a sequence diagram. So another point here is that the kind of diagram you choose to show, or the prompt or the text prompt you choose to show, um, is a function of what level of critical thinking you want the students to do at that stage of the project. Okay, because I'm talking about several stages of the project, and so you have to focus on one stage at a time. All right, so your choice of the UML diagram is based on what kind of critical thinking, how complex critical thinking you want the user to go through. So similarly here, you see the overall risk and reward communication. You see the text explanations presented in a way that helps them draw the UML diagram more successfully. And you can just provide these prompts in the yellow and the red box, in the green and the red boxes, as you see, and you make them draw the state diagrams and the component diagrams. Okay. So whichever one feels good for that particular portfolio, for that particular type of UML diagramming that you're aiming to achieve. Okay, so here we are talking about overall risk and reward communication. So we are talking about a state diagram, because when you're talking about overall risk, you have to identify both the risk averse individuals, the risk averse portfolios, and the risk prone individuals and the risk prone activities that are associated with it. Okay, so it's kind of a mixed bag here. Okay, so here you provide them the steps. This could be another kind of the prompt, which is the first layer of prompt, and you make them do diagramming, concept map diagramming using something like Creately, software like Creately, or the students can also use something like Lucid Chart. Either way, it's going to work. These are also another kind of prompt that is generated from the LLM, and or you can just provide them with the UML diagram as you see on the right and make them match it with their diagrams in Creately based on the prompts. So you can have various permutations and combinations that you can use based on the steps as you see here. So the steps are pretty specific. It lets them identify the class, the attributes, and the actions as well. Okay, and there's a specific goal that can be associated with it so that the students will understand what's going on here. What do you want to achieve? So here you see a few shot prompting strategy that associated with these several cases, these four cases that we have identified: high risk options, the investment options, savings options, which is low risk. Case three is overall risk and reward communication, and then the component-based overview of the app's risk and reward communication. So you give them a first prompt, first layer prompt, the second layer prompt, and the third layer prompt, and help them to iteratively improve on the UML diagramming or the concept mapping diagramming based on the Creately and the Lucid chart or the IHMC concept mapping chart that they are that's being created. So you provide them the cue and the expected output for each of these prompt layers, for each of these case studies. And this is the response. So students will be able to do something out of it, and then you give them an answer. You give them a response to each of the prompts that's being generated. Okay, so that's what you see here. So this is actually the layer one prompting, first, second, third, based on cues and expected output. And here you actually provide a response to each of these prompts. Okay, so this itself could be enough, but sometimes it may not be, depending on the complexity of the financial process or the usability structure that you're using from Investopedia or Morningstar or Yahoo Finance. So you provide them a response. So whichever works, you can use it as long as it works for you and the class. Okay, and you can also trim it down to a very simplistic structure that the students will be able to use. This is what I'm using here now could also be used for a graduate class. So it's not necessarily I'm talking about an undergraduate course. This could be a course even for the graduate school, but you can also trim it down and make it very simple for use as an elective in an undergraduate course as well, with prompts which are very simple, with concept maps, which are very simple. You're just identifying the actors, the actions, and the attributes. All right. So you can just use it in layers. So here you see some of the UML diagrams that you can end up drawing iteratively and match it with your concept map that you have drawn using Creately and Lucid Chart. All right, based on the response that you see here. So what you see here is the response, visual response based on the cues as you see here. Okay, so you have four case studies here, and you have four UML diagrams that is the result of the responses that is generated here, the cues and the expected output that's generated here. Okay, so that really helps. And as I said, you can also work from the other side of things. You can start with the UML diagram and make students write identify the different actors, the actions, and the attributes, and the sequence, and the use cases, okay, one by one from in text. So you can move from visual to text, or you can also move from text to visual as you prefer to do. So as I said, you start with the use of concept mapping in Lucidchart creately, and then move more towards something like using something like Mermaid Chart, Plant UML, Git UML, and so on. And these are the different steps where you can use LLM prompting to help students understand what you're trying to say, identify, give them various kinds of cues, and walk them through iteratively, because this has to be a few prompt thing. If your end goal is to create a concept map, you walk them through this LLM prompting. Okay, you're gonna even if your end goal is the UML diagramming, you can walk them through this kind of LLM prompting so that they can get there and then compare their work with the work that's generated with something like Plant UML and Git UML. All right. So either way, it's going to work. So whichever way you think about it, it's going to work. So this is something interesting because this is based on the interaction of a user with a system like in Investopedia or Yahoo Finance. So a particular user is using something like a portfolio tracker, stock screener, educational articles, simulator, news updates, and they have a certain frequency in which they are using it. Okay, this first figure is showing the usage percentage. And the next one is a regression analysis. It's showing usage versus the time spent on certain kinds of clicks, certain kinds of pages in Investopedia. So this is basically an identification of the high frequency actions, and you can draw a state diagram based on that. So you can see so someone is viewing a portfolio. You can actually start from being idle to portfolio tracker to viewing portfolio. Then you go on to educational articles and up to stock screener and viewing stocks. But you may not do so. So you can look you can view a portfolio, then you can look at several articles, and then you can go back to being idle. So that means you're not really going into understanding how a stock screener works and how the viewing stocks works and how it goes back to the portfolio tracker. So it depends on to what extent a person chooses to engage in the web page, okay, when they're using something like an investment simulator in Investopedia, or read something from Yahoo Finance and check out how the simulator works in Yahoo Finance. So either way, it's going to work. So this is kind of a state diagram as to how different users can be in different states. So one of the assignments could be for students to do a usability study where they identify the frequency of action, do a regression analysis, and then draw a state diagram based on that. Or you can start from the other way around as well. You can take it as a hypothesis that a typical state diagram is likely to be this case, and you are trying to see whether the actual user in your group acts in a similar way based on their knowledge, their understanding, or they're not. Okay, so it could be a hypothesis as well. So you can take the state diagram as a hypothesis to start with as well. All right. Okay, so the next thing is a similar thing. You identify the high frequency actions in terms of the aggressive growth. So the first case is showing a risk-prone investor and the actions that a risk-prone investor is likely to take. The next diagram is showing a risk-averse individual investor and how they are accessing various pages like so for example, the risk-averse investor is likely to focus more on conservative portfolio and income portfolio, but a risk-prone investor is going to focus much more on the aggressive growth portfolio and the growth portfolio. And you see a state diagram here on the right that kind of sums up the story from these two. You combine a risk-prone investor and a risk-averse investor, and this is a very simplistic version. So basically, the idea behind showing something like this, where you see the state diagram as much more detailed and sequential as opposed to something like this, is to show that students can refine based on the first layer of UML diagram that's being drawn. So it's a continuous process of improvement. And the other thing that I wanted to say, a final thing, is that a state diagram could also be not only for the financial investment kind of thing, that's one application, but it could be also for general monetary policy and fiscal policy. So even if you take it from a microeconomic perspective or a macroeconomic perspective, it's going to work. You can show it as an expansionary state, balanced state, contractionary state, crisis response state. So if the government is in different states, how they're going to invest, what are they going to do in terms of the tax. Okay, what's going to be the tax policy of the government, what's going to be the spending policy of the government. Okay, are they going to increase spending, are they going to cut down on spending, are they going to move more towards austerity move, or are they going to be more conservative in terms of the tax hike, personal income tax, corporate income tax. So what kind of crisis management states they have, what would they consider as emergency spending. So all types of things could be considered for the different states that should be considered as part of the fiscal policy. Similarly with monetary policy, similarly for international trade policies in terms of export potential, export policy, import policy, different kinds of tax imposition, import duties, export duties, and all those kinds of states that you can identify for different kinds of fiscal policies and monetary policies. So, what I was trying to say is that it's not only you do not have this kind of a state diagram, UML diagramming only for the investment portfolio. I just used it because uh, I wanted to bring in the customer's web usability side of things when interacting with investment portfolios or loan agreements, or common customers, how they interact with different financial interfaces in their daily life. But if you think about it globally from a macroeconomic perspective, the same thing applies. You can consider it in terms of in an economics course. A computer science major who is working on economics course can also focus on fiscal policy, monetary policies, and draw state diagrams like this, and then create algorithms based on such drawings and so on. Okay. All right. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for attending this presentation. And I can take questions based on this. Thank you.